I am to be executed at dawn. It is fitting that my final night should be spent like this, quill in hand, confession spilling forth. Truth after 10,000 years of lies. The weight of it crushes even my enhanced physiology. Each word is more painful than the severing of limb from body. But I must speak. I must hear myself. Whoever finds this testament, I am Atheon, once shield captain of the Adeptus Custodes, keeper of the Emperor's secrets, now traitor, heretic, truth-bearer. The golden throne has always hummed, a constant subsonic vibration that reverberates through the adamantium floors of the inner palace. We custodians grew accustomed to it over centuries of service. The machine spirit, we told ourselves. The technological marvel sustaining our Lord's immortal form. How convenient the little lies we whisper to ourselves to make bearable what would otherwise break us. 10,000 years I have stood vigil. My golden armor has grown dull despite daily polishing rites. My body, though shaped beyond mortal limits by the Emperor's own design, has begun to fail. Age comes even to the custodes, albeit slowly. First, the eyes dim, then the mind follows. Many of my brothers choose the honorable path when their vigilance falters. They surrender their armor, take up the black cloak of the eyes of the Emperor, and venture into the wider Imperium to serve as silent watchers. I remained, stubborn, perhaps, or simply afraid of what existed beyond these walls that had been my home for millennia. I should have chosen exile. 3 weeks ago, by imperial standard, I led the midnight inspection of the Sanctum Imperialis. It is a ritual performed without fail every 24 hours since the Emperor's interment. 4 custodian guards accompanied me, their guardian spears humming with restrained energy. The massive doors to the throne room swung open on actuators the size of titans. Incense was thick enough to chew. Servo skulls darted through the haze, their monotonous litany weaving with the chants of the tech priests who tend the golden throne. The ritual was familiar, comforting in its unchanging nature. We processed toward the dais where the master of mankind sits enthroned, his withered corpse sustained by ancient technologies of the Dark Age, his skull-like face forever frozen in silent agony. I had seen it countless times. Yet that night something changed. A droplet. Just one. At first, I took it for condensation, perhaps oil from one of the countless mechanisms that power the life-sustaining marvel of the Golden Throne. But as it caught the light, I saw its true nature. Blood. Not the dried, ancient dust that should have long since clotted in the Emperor's desiccated veins, but fresh blood with the unmistakable golden sheen that marks the vital fluid of our gene-father. I said nothing to my brothers. Instead, I marked the location in my mind. Section 8, Junction 27B of the throne's vast undercarriage. After completing the inspection, I returned to my quarters in the custodian barracks. Sleep eluded me. That single drop of blood occupied my thoughts like an infection. It should not have been possible. The Emperor had not bled in 10 millennia, not since the final battle with the arch-traitor Horus. The following night I returned alone, using clearance codes that even among the custodes few possess. The Mechanicus adepts did not question my presence. None dare question a custodian in the heart of the imperial palace. I examined the undercarriage of the throne, the precise point where I had witnessed the impossible droplet. There was nothing, no trace. But the humming had changed, imperceptible to any but those who have heard it for thousands of years. The pitch was higher, irregular in its cadence, like a heart struggling against arrhythmia. I placed my bare hand against the golden surface, feeling sacrilegious even as I did so. The metal was warm, no, hot, burning with an inner fire that the external cooling systems should have rendered impossible. And beneath my palm I felt it, a pulse. In that moment, I should have reported to the Captain General. I should have raised the alarm, brought the full attention of the custodes to bear on this anomaly. That was my sworn duty, the purpose of my existence. Instead, curiosity overrode 10 millennia of conditioning. I followed the pulse downward. Few know of the sub-levels beneath the Golden Throne, ancient access tunnels dating back to the Unification Wars, when the Emperor first established his rule over Terra. Fewer still possess the authority to enter them. As shield captain of the Hegemon Guard, I was among that select company. The tunnels were narrow, designed before the creation of the Custodes. I was forced to remove my armor piece by golden piece, storing it in one of the maintenance alcoves that dotted the passage. Clad only in my robes, I felt naked, vulnerable in a way I had not experienced since my ascension to the Custodian Guard. The weight of the palace pressed down from above, billions of tons of marble and adamantium housing billions of souls, all unaware of my transgression. The air grew thin as I descended, the ancient ventilation system struggling against entropy. The bleeding sigils began to appear at level 50, etched into the walls in languages I recognized from the Forbidden Archives. Eldar runes, Necron glyphs, symbols of human civilizations long extinct, and others, twisting shapes that hurt the eyes to gaze upon directly. They had been carved with obsessive precision into the metal walls, each line perfect, and from them seeped that same golden fluid I had seen upon the throne. I am no psyker. The Emperor's modifications to our gene code rendered us resistant to the touch of the warp, embodiments of his vision for humanity. Yet even I could feel the power emanating from those symbols. It pressed against my mind like the weight of an ocean trench. Each heartbeat grew louder in my ears as I continued my descent. Level 66 presented me with a door. Not the magnificent portals of the upper palace, wrought with scenes of imperial triumph. This was utilitarian, ancient, a slab of dark metal that absorbed light rather than reflected it. No handles adorned its surface, no visible means of entry. Yet as I approached, it recognized me. Or rather, it recognized what I was. Custodian genetic markers triggered mechanisms dormant for millennia. With a sigh of equalizing pressure, the door slid sideways into the wall. The chamber beyond defied comprehension. It stretched impossibly far, larger than the physical constraints of the mountain should allow. The ceiling soared hundreds of meters overhead, lost in shadow despite the ghostly illumination of floating spheres of cold fire. The floor was neither metal nor stone, but a perfect mirror, reflecting everything above with flawless clarity. At the center stood an upright sarcophagus, twice the height of a space marine, fashioned from the same light-drinking material as the door. No adornment marred its surface, save a single symbol at its heart. The same icon that crowns the Emperor's own standard. A lightning bolt and wings. But here, the wings were not those of the Imperial Aquila. They were stretched membranes like those of Terran bats, or demons. I approached slowly, each step echoing in the vast chamber. The air tasted of ozone and copper. The hair on my arms rose. Power radiated from the sarcophagus, raw, untamed, not the sterile energy of the throne's engines, but something alive and hungry. There was no seam, no hinge. Yet as I stood before it, a line of golden light appeared down its center. The crack widened, revealing darkness within. No, something worse than darkness. A void that consumed light, a negative radiance that seemed to devour the world around it. From that fissure emerged a voice, not sound as humans understand it, but direct communion with my mind. A voice I had heard only in dreams and ancient recordings. His voice. Etheon, it said, my name in his mouth, both violation and benediction. I fell to my knees. Tears streamed unbidden down my face. 10,000 years of faith and duty collapsed beneath the weight of that voice. The Emperor, alive, conscious, speaking. Rise, the voice commanded. And I obeyed, as I had been created to do. The crack widened further. Golden light spilled out, blinding in its intensity. I shielded my eyes with my arm, squinting into the radiance. As my vision adjusted, I beheld him, not the withered corpse upon the golden throne, not the perfect, godlike figure from the propaganda murals. What stood before me was both more and less than those images. One half of the figure shone with the familiar radiance of the master of mankind, perfect in proportion, powerful beyond comprehension. The face I had sworn to serve, rendered in flawless detail. The other half, twisted sinew and exposed muscle, bone that shifted and flowed like quicksilver, an eye that was not an eye but a window into some impossible dimension where colors had texture and sounds had taste. Flesh pulsed with internal light that shifted through spectrums no human was meant to perceive. Half god, half abomination, the Emperor's true form. "You see me as I am," the figure said, its voice now audible, resonating from both the perfect mouth and the writhing mass of its other half. The first of my sons to look upon this truth in 10 millennia. I wanted to avert my gaze. Every instinct screamed to look away, to reject what stood before me, but I could not. The same compulsion that had drawn me down to this forbidden place now held me transfixed. "My lord," I managed to whisper, my voice thin and ragged in the charged air. "How is this possible? You sit upon the throne above, the Mechanicus tend your mortal remains, the Astronomicon burns with your psychic might." The perfect half smiled, a gesture so human it felt obscene upon that divided countenance. "The corpse above is but a shell," it said. "A focus for humanity's faith, a beacon through which I channel my will, but not my true self." Never that. It stepped fully out of the sarcophagus. Golden blood dripped from the seam between its halves, sizzling where it struck the mirrored floor. "Since the day my son struck me down, I have existed in this state," the figure continued. "Balanced between realms, neither fully of the materium nor of the immaterium. A god in becoming, a being of transition. With each word, I felt my sanity fray. The foundations of my existence, the purpose to which I had dedicated 10 millennia, crumbled beneath me. The Imperium worships the Emperor as a god. But what god is this? What divinity wears such divided horror as its flesh? "The throne does not sustain me," the figure said, answering my unspoken doubt. "I sustain the throne. My will alone holds back the tides of the warp from consuming terror. My divided essence maintains the Astronomicon that guides humanity through the stars. But at a cost, Atheon, always at a cost." It gestured toward its corrupted half, that semi-demonic mass of flesh. "This is the price of godhood. To rule in the materium, I must exist partially in the immaterium. To guide humanity, I must understand what they face. To fight the ruinous powers, I must become something of what they are." I found my voice again, though it emerged as little more than a rasp. Then the imperial truth was a lie. There are gods. The perfect half frowned, while the corrupted half twisted in what might have been laughter. "The truth was necessary," it said. "Had humanity embraced religion during our expansion, they would have fed the warp entities, strengthened them beyond containment. The truth was a vaccine against the disease of faith, but vaccines contain a weakened form of the disease itself." It stepped closer. I felt the heat radiating from its perfect half, the hollow cold emanating from its twisted half. Two opposed forces balanced in one impossible being. "And now," it continued, "the Imperium worships me as a god. Their faith strengthens me, sustains this divided existence. The great irony of my crusade against religion, I became the very thing I sought to eliminate." Questions burned in my mind, too many, too terrible to voice. One rose above the rest, demanding utterance. "Why show this to me?" I asked. "Why now, after 10,000 years?" The perfect half smiled again. The corrupted half pulsed with shifting colors that hurt to behold. "Because the balance is failing, Atheon. The golden blood seeps through. The barriers weaken. Soon what sits upon the throne above and what stands before you now must reunite. And when that happens, terror will know the truth that you now bear." "And what truth is that, my lord?" I asked, fearing the answer more than I have ever feared death. Both halves spoke in unison, the perfect voice and the gibbering chorus combining in terrible harmony. That to save humanity, I had to become its greatest enemy, that the line between God and demon is thinner than the edge of a blade, that faith sustains not because it is true, but because the believing make it so. The figure raised its hands, one perfect and golden, one twisted and impossible. The warp is the mirror of humanity's soul, Atheon, and I have gazed into that mirror for longer than any being should. What stares back is neither the god your Imperium worships, nor the secular leader I once pretended to be. It is something new, something becoming. My legs gave way. I collapsed onto the mirrored floor. My reflection showed a face I barely recognized, aged beyond its years, eyes wide with comprehension no human mind was meant to hold. "What would you have me do with this knowledge?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How am I to serve, knowing what I know?" The figure regarded me with both its perfect eye and its swirling void of non-existence. "That," it said, "is your choice to make. The first true choice any custodian has been granted since your creation. You may return to the surface and speak what you have witnessed. You may end your existence here, taking this truth into oblivion. Or you may join me in the great becoming." It extended both hands toward me, an offer, a test, a damnation. "Consider carefully, my son. For whichever path you choose, the Imperium as you know it cannot survive what comes next." With those words, the figure stepped back into the sarcophagus. The crack of golden light narrowed, then sealed entirely, leaving me alone in that impossible chamber with a choice no mortal was equipped to make. I remained there for hours, perhaps days. Time held little meaning in that place where reality's grip was weak. When at last I rose, my decision was made. I would return to the surface, not to raise an alarm, not to spread open heresy, but to record what I had witnessed, to leave a testament for whoever might follow after the coming change. The ascent felt longer than the descent, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached my discarded armor, I was an old man in spirit if not in flesh. I donned the golden plate mechanically, each piece a burden rather than a privilege. The weight of duty had never felt so crushing. Upon returning to the upper levels, I discovered that only a single night had passed in the world above. My absence had gone unnoticed. The routines of the palace continued uninterrupted. Prayers were intoned, incense burned. The emperor was worshipped as the god thing he had become, and beneath it all, beneath faith and ritual and desperate hope, the truth pulsed like a corrupted heart. For 3 weeks I maintained my duties. I led inspections, I stood vigil. I played the role that had been mine for 10 millennia, all while the knowledge gnawed at me from within. The perfect face and the twisted horror. The divided emperor, the god that was not a god but something stranger still. Today, I broke. During the evening inspection, as we stood before the withered corpse upon the golden throne, I saw it, the corruption spreading. A patch of the emperor's exposed skin, just visible beneath the life support apparatus, shifted like quicksilver, pulsing with internal light. The transformation had begun. I spoke then. I told my brothers what I had seen below, what awaits humanity when the balance finally fails. They stared at me with faces carved from stone, unmoved, unbelieving. Then the guardian prefect gave the order. I was seized, my weapons stripped, charged with heresy of the highest order. The captain general himself pronounced my sentence, death. So here I sit in this cell, smaller than the sarcophagus that housed the emperor's true form, quill in hand, confession flowing onto parchment that will likely burn before any eyes but my executioners can read it. Yet I write nonetheless, I bear witness, I speak truth, though truth be damned. The emperor is not what humanity believes. Neither corpse, nor god, nor secular leader returned. He is becoming something else, something that straddles realities, and when his transformation completes, the Imperium will face its final test. Faith against truth, Hope against reality, the god thing that was once the master of mankind against the horror of his own becoming. Dawn approaches. I hear the tread of my brothers outside my cell. They come for me, golden in their righteousness, blind in their faith. I do not blame them. Once I was as they are. But I have looked upon the Emperor's true visage, both of his faces, and such a sight cannot be forgotten. I am Atheon, once shield captain of the Adeptus Custodes, keeper of the Emperor's secrets, now traitor, heretic, truth-bearer. These are the last words I set to parchment. The golden throne bleeds. The god thing stirs. The Imperium tilts toward its ending. Time does not move normally in the cells beneath the Imperial Palace. Perhaps days have passed since I first wrote those words. Perhaps only minutes. My executioners have not come. The dawn I awaited refuses to arrive. Instead, my cell door opened, and the Captain General himself stood there. Trajan Valoris, his war plate radiant even in the meager light, guardian spear held like a scepter rather than a weapon. "Rise, shield Captain Atheon," he said, his voice giving nothing away. "Your execution has been postponed." I stood, my legs unsteady from confinement and revelation both. Has my sentence been revoked? Has my heresy been re-examined? Valoris's face remained carved stone, as much a mask as his helm. "The tribune prefects have convened. Your words have raised questions. You will answer them before judgment is carried out. Not absolved, then, merely delayed. The custodes value truth, even when that truth burns. I should have expected no less." Valoris escorted me personally through corridors I had walked for millennia, though now I saw them with altered eyes. The vastness of the palace, raised to proclaim humanity's greatness, seemed suddenly hollow. Grand theater wrapped around a carefully managed lie. Golden aquilus, heroic statues, soaring arches, reliefs of impossible victories, all propaganda for a regime maintained by curated ignorance. We passed squads of custodian guard who refused to meet my gaze, not from disgust, but from a superstitious fear that heresy might be caught by simple proximity. Only Valoris appeared untouched by that unease. Then again, he has stood nearest to the Emperor for centuries. Perhaps he had long suspected what I now knew. The chamber of Tribunal Exactus was a perfect circle hewn from a single block of ancient Terran marble, dating back to the Unification Wars. 12 tribune prefects sat upon thrones arranged in a smaller ring at the chamber's center. No gallery, no observers. Custodian justice is conducted in private. Our disgrace belongs to us alone. I stood before them unarmored, clothed only in a plain robe. They remained encased in their full panoply of war, as though expecting violence from a single unarmed man. Or perhaps they feared that whatever truths I carried might require the comfort of ceramite and auramite between us. "Shield Captain Atheon," began the most senior tribune, his voice magnified by his helm's vox. "You stand accused of heresy against the Emperor of mankind. You claim to have encountered a manifestation of our Lord in the sub-levels of the palace. You claim this manifestation revealed truths that contradict 10,000 years of imperial doctrine. Speak. Relate in full what you allege to have seen." So I did. Every step of that descent, every word traded with the divided emperor, every detail I dared to retain. I concealed nothing. My death was already assured. Let truth, then, be my last loyal act. They listened without movement, statues of gold and blood. When I finished, silence settled over the chamber like dust. Long moments passed. Then the senior tribune spoke again. "You are not the first, shield captain." 5 simple words, and the ground of my understanding shifted. Not the first, not the only one. My knees threatened to buckle. "Explain," I managed. The tribune's helm angled slightly toward Valoris. The Captain General gave a tiny nod. "Permission. Once in each millennium since the Emperor was enthroned upon the Golden Throne," the senior tribune said, "a custodian has been drawn to the sub-levels. Always one of high rank, always one of perfect record, always one who has begun to show the first signs of age, and always they return. Changed, I forced myself to breathe. And these others, what became of them? Some chose silence, the Tribune replied. They resumed their duties and served until age claimed them. Others chose exile, joining the eyes of the Emperor and disappearing into the wider Imperium. A few chose death, falling upon their own guardian spears rather than endure what they had learned. Another Tribune leaned forward. And some, Shield Captain Athion, chose as you have done. They spoke. Those were given a final duty. Then I understood. The delay of my execution was no clemency. It was reassignment. Valoris stepped closer, his guardian spear striking the marble floor with a sound like a verdict. The Emperor's nature lies beyond human comprehension, he said. What you witnessed was a fragment of his divinity, distorted by the limitations of your perception. The Imperium endures because faith endures, not because that faith is misdirected, but because it is required. Then you knew, I said, sweeping my gaze over the ring of helms. All of you know what lies beneath the throne, what the Emperor has become, and still you serve. We serve precisely because we know, the senior Tribune answered. The alternatives are worse than the burden of this truth. The Emperor, divided though his form may be, remains humanity's only shield against the void. Would you have us relinquish that shield merely because its shape unsettles you? Placed so starkly, the answer was obvious. Even with the knowledge I now carried, the Imperium remained the only bulwark against extinction, against Xenos predation and the corruptions of chaos. If the cost of that protection was the worship of a being balanced between godhood and damnation, was that price truly too high? What would you have me do? I asked, echoing the very question I had once posed to the Emperor's sundered form. Valoris approached, offering a data slate. You will travel to Titan, he said. There, you will join a conclave of those who share your understanding. You will add your testimony to the Codex Obscurus, the hidden chronicle of the Emperor's true nature. Then you will receive your final assignment. I took the slate. Its physical weight was nothing next to the burden already crushing me. And that assignment, you will be a bearer of truth, said the senior Tribune. When the Emperor's transformation reaches its zenith, humanity must be readied, not with lies, not with blind devotion alone, but with comprehension. You will sow the first seeds of that understanding among chosen individuals across the Imperium, inquisitors, chapter masters, lord generals. Those whose faith must be tempered by wisdom if they are to guide humanity through what approaches. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. From condemned heretic to sanctioned envoy in the span of an hour. The irony bit deep. And if I refuse? I asked, though I knew the answer already. Then your original sentence stands, Valoris said simply. The choice is yours. But consider this, Shield Captain. If what you saw is true, if the Emperor is indeed becoming something beyond our grasp, then humanity will need guides who have faced that truth and remained standing. Who better than one who has served him for 10,000 years? I looked down at the slate. It displayed a single image, a small, sleek vessel, built for stealth, not for battle. The hull designation beneath it read, Whisper of Truth. My chariot, if I accepted. How many have chosen this path before me? I asked. 9, replied the senior Tribune. 9 in 10 millennia. The 10th holds particular meaning in imperial numerology. The completion of a cycle, the fulfillment of prophecy. Prophecy. Once I would have dismissed the word as foolish mysticism, but after what I had seen beneath the throne, after understanding how thin the veil between reality and the warp truly is, I could no longer be so certain. I will need time, I said, though my heart already knew. Death would be simpler, cleaner. But if the Imperium were changing as profoundly as the Emperor himself, then it would need preparation. You have until moonrise, said Valoris. The whisper of truth departs for Titan with or without you. Decide, Shield Captain. There is no going back from either path. No return. No erasing what I had seen. No forgetting that bifurcated form, half radiance, half horror. The Emperor's true nature revealed to one judged worthy to bear it, or merely unfortunate enough to encounter it at the appointed time. They did not return me to a cell, but to modest quarters near the custodian barracks, neither fully prisoner nor truly free. An appropriate purgatory for one who had witnessed the liminal state of the master of mankind. I sat on the simple cot, data slate in hand, and began to read the testimonies of those who preceded me. 9 custodians in 10,000 years, 9 drawn down into the sub-levels, 9 who had stood before the Emperor's divided form, 9 who had chosen to carry that truth rather than flee from it into death or denial. The details varied, but the substance was the same. The Emperor balanced between matter and immaterium, the equilibrium failing, millennium by millennium, the transformation advancing with the inevitability of entropy. And across those accounts, a pattern surfaced. Each visitation coincided with some great crisis of the Imperium, the age of apostasy, the war of the beast, the nova terra interregnum. Moments when humanity's fate wavered. Moments when truth became as necessary as faith. I read until my eyes grew heavy. Sleep took me with the slate still clutched in my hand, my dreams haunted by that split face, perfect gold and shifting abomination, god and monster, emperor and something other. I woke to the hiss of my door opening. Valoris again, this time unarmed, no guardian spear. A gesture of trust, perhaps, or merely confidence that I posed no threat. "Moonrise approaches, Shield Captain," he said without preamble. "Have you chosen?" I rose, still holding the slate. "These others, the bearers of truth, spread understanding through the Imperium?" Valoris nodded. Carefully, selectively. The common citizen has no need of such knowledge. Their simple faith carries them through their short, harsh lives. But those who command, whose decisions shape the fates of worlds, they need more than belief. They require context. "And now I am to provide that context," I said. "If you accept," Valoris replied. "The alternative remains. Many would call death the kinder road." I set the slate aside. "I have served the Emperor for 10,000 years, Captain General. I will not abandon that duty simply because his nature is more complicated than our catechisms admit." For the first time since my arrest, something like approval softened his rigid posture. "Then gather what personal items you wish," he said. "The whisper of truth awaits. And, Shield Captain Athion," he paused, "from this moment you are no longer custodian. You are truth-bearer. The burden you carry separates you from our brotherhood, even as it renders you indispensable to our cause. Exile, then. Expected, yet no less painful. The custodian guard cannot count among its ranks one who speaks openly of the Emperor's duality. I was to be something else now, something apart. "I understand," I said. The severing cut deeper than I had imagined. 10 millennia of fraternity ended by a single night beneath the palace. "One last matter," Valoris said, drawing a small adamantium case from his belt pouch. "This is yours." Inside lay a small golden pin shaped like the imperial aquila, but with a subtle corruption. One of the twin heads was warped, its beak lengthened into something more like a demon's maw than a raptor's. "The mark of the truth-bearer," Valoris explained. "Where it hidden, those who must know will know where to look." I took the pin. It weighed almost nothing, yet felt heavier than any plate of aura might. "And my armor? My weapons?" "They remain here," Valoris said. "Where you go, such obvious signs of imperial authority would attract the wrong eyes. You will receive clothing more fitting your new role, and weapons less conspicuous than a guardian spear, though no less lethal." I inclined my head. In truth, I had ceased to be a custodian the moment I descended to the sub-levels. This merely made it official. "I am ready," I said, fastening the twisted aquila to the inside of my robe, close to my heart's. a suitable place for such a weight. Valoris led me through seldom-used corridors, avoiding the main arteries of the palace where our passage might draw attention. We emerged onto a small landing platform, one of thousands scattered across the sprawling edifice. The Whisper of Truth waited there, its hull a light-devouring black, stripped of all sigils. No aquilus, no purity seals, no litanies of loyalty. A shadow given form. A robed figure stood at the foot of the boarding ramp, face hidden beneath a deep hood. As we approached, he lifted his head, and I recognized the features despite the passage of centuries. "Tribune Dionysian," I said, unable to hide my surprise. "You were reported lost during the Third Black Crusade." The old custodian's face was scored with age far beyond what even our kind usually show, but his eyes remained as sharp as when he had stood at the Emperor's side in the War of the Beast. "I was lost," he said, voice a rasp of dry parchment. "Lost to the Brotherhood of the Custodes, but found to a greater purpose." He regarded me steadily. "As you are now found." I turned to Valoris. "You knew," I said, accusation bleeding through. "I suspected," he corrected. "Each bearer of truth chooses his successor, steering him toward revelation with a light hand. Dionysian has observed your path for centuries, judging you one whose mind might encounter the truth and not shatter." Dionysian gestured toward the ship's interior. "We have much to discuss, Atheon. The conclave on Titan awaits, and time grows short. The Emperor's metamorphosis quickens. What once took centuries now unfolds in decades. Soon it will be measured in years, then months." The realization struck like a hammer. "How long?" I asked. "Until it is complete." "A century at most," Dionysian answered. "After 10 millennia of stasis, the balance is shifting faster and faster. What you saw below now manifests more often upon the throne itself. The Mechanicus whisper of anomalies they cannot resolve. The Sisters of Silence sense disturbances in the null field. The signs multiply." Valoris placed a hand on my shoulder, a final gesture of brotherhood. "Go with purpose, truth-bearer," he said. "Prepare the way. In the Emperor's transformation lies either the salvation of our species or its annihilation. None of us, not even those who have glimpsed his dual aspect, can say which." I clasped his forearm in the old warrior's grip, one last connection to the brotherhood I had served for so long. "Guard the throne, Captain General," I said. "Whatever occupies it, whatever it is becoming, remains our only shield against the dark." "Until the stars themselves grow cold," he replied, completing the ancient custodian oath. I turned and followed Dionysian into the Whisper of Truth. The ramp sealed behind us with a hiss like a final door closing. Through a small viewport, I watched Valoris recede as the ship lifted, banking toward the night. Terra, the throne world, my home for 10,000 years, fell away beneath us. The loss felt physical, like having an organ torn from my body, yet braided with that pain was something unexpected. Relief. The burden of pretense slipped from my shoulders. The exhausting effort of clinging to a curated faith was finally over. Dionysian brought me to the ship's cramped command chamber, where 3 other robed figures waited. Their faces bore the unmistakable marks of extreme age. Even our perfected flesh cannot defy time forever. Each wore plain robes, and each, when they shifted, revealed the faint gleam of the twisted aquila pinned at their breast. "Brothers," Dionysian said, "I present Atheon, once shield captain of the Hegemon Guard, now the 10th bearer." They studied me with eyes that had seen too much, measuring, weighing, deciding whether I was truly prepared for what I had chosen. "He has witnessed the Emperor's dual nature?" one asked, his accent old even by our standards, the clipped, archaic Terran of the Unification era. "He has," Dionysian replied. "And like the 9 before him, he has chosen truth over comforting falsehoods." The Ancient One nodded. "Then we are complete. The cycle closes." There it was again. Cycle. "Explain," I demanded, patience for riddles finally worn thin after all I had endured. Dionysian motioned for me to sit at the circular table that dominated the command center. The other truth-bearers joined us, forming a ring of worn faces and ancient insight. The Emperor's foresight did not end with his interment upon the golden throne, Dionysian began. Even divided between materium and immaterium, he planned for what would follow. The truth-bearers were his creation, not ours, a contingency for the day when faith alone would no longer be enough to sustain the Imperium. One of the others, a woman with augmetic reconstruction around her eyes, continued, "Every 1,000 years, a custodian is drawn to witness the Emperor's true form, one whose mind is strong enough not to shatter, one who can carry that truth to carefully chosen individuals across the Imperium. And I am the 10th, I said, feeling the realization settle into place. Why does that matter? Why does the cycle complete with me? The oldest of them leaned forward, his thin hands clasped before him. Because the Emperor foretold that the 10th witnessing would mark the beginning of the final phase of his transformation. The great change approaches, Artheon. What has been building for 10 millennia will flower in our lifetime. Despite the ship's carefully regulated temperature, I felt cold. And what exactly is this great change? What does the Emperor become when the transformation is complete? The four truth-bearers exchanged looks, the wordless conversation of those who have carried the same burden for too long. We do not know for certain, Dionysian admitted. Each of us has seen his dual nature, but none has been granted a clear vision of the end state. We have theories, patterns, extrapolations from 10,000 years of observation. But the truth may be something unique in the history of the galaxy. A human ascending to divinity while embracing the warp without falling to its corruption. The Primarchs were his first attempt, the woman said. Beings of both realms, material and immaterial, but they proved unstable. Half fell to chaos. The rest were not sufficient for his ultimate design. And that design was, I asked. Transcendence, Dionysian said simply. The Emperor sought what no human had achieved. Godhood without corruption, warp ascension without losing human purpose or perspective. The final evolution of humanity embodied in its creator. I remembered the divided figure I had seen, half radiant perfection, half roiling monstrosity. That did not look like transcendence, Tribune. It looked like corruption disguised as divinity. The Ancient One shook his head. You saw a single moment in a process spanning millennia. What you beheld was not the final shape, but the transition, the chrysalis, not the butterfly. And when that butterfly emerges, I pressed, what happens to the Imperium? That, Dionysian said gravely, depends greatly on how prepared humanity is for the revelation. That is why we exist, Altheon. Not only to witness, but to prepare, to choose those who must know the truth before it fully manifests. To cultivate understanding that will let humanity endure when faith in the old Emperor is no longer enough to hold them together. The ship shivered as it slipped into the warp, real space yielding to swirling immaterium, a fitting mirror to my own passage from the hard certainties of custodian duty to the shifting ambiguities of truth-bearing. Tell me of Titan, I said, changing the line of questioning. Why gather there? The Grey Knights, the woman replied. Of all the Emperor's servants, they alone were created with full knowledge of chaos and its corruption. Their fortress monastery holds archives from the Horus heresy itself, records of the Emperor's preparations for the age after his enthronement. They are familiar with truths, others are spared. They know of his dual nature, I asked, surprised the secret spread beyond custodes and truth-bearers. Their Supreme Grand Master knows, Dionysian clarified. Each generation, a truth-bearer travels to Titan, updates the Codex Obscuros, and briefs the new Supreme Grand Master. The Grey Knights are our allies in this work, though they frame it through their own purpose, the eternal war against chaos. And do they deem the Emperor's transformation salvation or damnation? Again, the shared look. They withhold final judgment, the Ancient One said. As should you, until you have seen the full body of evidence. The pattern is clearest when viewed across 10 millennia. not from a single encounter. I inclined my head. I'd seen one moment. These four, and those before them, had watched an aeon-long metamorphosis unfold. After Titan, Dionysian said, returning to practical matters, your true work begins, the identification and preparation of key individuals across the Imperium. Inquisitors of the right temperament, chapter masters whose loyalty goes deeper than unthinking devotion, imperial officials whose decisions shape policy, even select members of the Mechanicus whose expertise will be critical during the transition. How do I find them? I asked. The woman smiled faintly, the expression unsettling on such an aged face. The same way Dionysian found you, Atheon. You watch, you test, you offer small truths and see how they react. Those who respond with considered thought rather than reflex denial or blind acceptance, those are your candidates. And once they are found, Dionysian added, you share only what they can bear, only when they must hear it. Some need just a nudge toward questioning doctrine. Others are ready for deeper revelations. The most critical will be brought to examine the evidence for themselves, though none but custodians may behold the Emperor's divided form directly. The ship's lights dimmed as the night cycle began. Our conversation faded into silence, 5 figures sitting with their thoughts. After so much revelation, I welcomed the quiet, a chance to start weaving what I had learned into what I had seen. Rest, Dionysian suggested, rising from the table. We have several days in the warp before we reach Titan. Time enough to read the full chronicles of the Truth-Bearers and draw your own conclusions. The others withdrew to their quarters. I remained staring at the twisted Aquila pin I had taken from my robe. One more question, Tribune, I said as Dionysian turned to go. Do you believe the Emperor is still human in any meaningful way, or has he become the god the ecclesiarchy proclaims, simply more complex than they understand? Dionysian paused in the doorway, expression thoughtful. I believe, Atheon, that the categories human and god no longer apply to what the Emperor is becoming. He is forging his own category, something unique in all creation. Whether that uniqueness saves humanity or destroys it may depend on the actions of those who know the truth. With that, he left me alone with my thoughts and my new burden. The 10th bearer, completion of the cycle, herald of the great change. I slept little that night cycle. When exhaustion finally dragged me under, my dreams were filled once more with that split face, perfect gold and twisting horror. But now there was something new. The division began to blur. The halves started to merge into a third state, neither fully material nor fully immaterial. Something becoming. I woke with a sharp breath, the images fading but the impression lingering, not corruption, but transformation, not a fall but an ascent. Was that genuine insight or wishful thinking? After 10,000 years of service, could I truly be objective about what my Emperor had become? The journey to Titan passed in study and contemplation. I devoured the collected testimonies of the 9 previous truth-bearers, noting how the Emperor's transformation advanced across the centuries. The earliest accounts described a divided being still strongly rooted in humanity, the golden material aspect dominant, the immaterial side vague and indistinct. As time moved on, the balance shifted. The immaterial aspect grew more defined, more structured, less chaotic growth, more deliberate adaptation. I discussed my observations with my fellow truth-bearers, especially Dionysian, whose witnessing occurred more than 3,000 years ago. His account fit the pattern. The Emperor he saw had been less sharply divided, the warp aspect less pronounced than in my own encounter. The trajectory was undeniable. What began as minor intrusion of immateriality into his essence had developed into the fully split being I had witnessed. And the endpoint? I asked Dionysian as we stood at a viewing port, watching the warp roil harmlessly against void shields and wards. If the pattern holds, does the immaterial eventually devour the material entirely? Perhaps, he said, or perhaps they fuse into a new synthesis. Neither one nor the other, but something that transcends both. The ancient Eldar once crafted their own gods. The Chaos powers are another path to divinity, born from the worst impulses of sentient minds. The Emperor may be carving a third way, one uniquely human in origin. At what cost? I wondered aloud. The Imperium is built on the notion of a perfect, unchanging emperor, a secular warlord elevated to godhood by humanity's hunger for faith, maybe, but still understood as human in origin and purpose. What becomes of that Imperium when its people are forced to confront what actually sits on the golden throne? That question, Dionysian said, weathered face unreadable, has consumed the thoughts of truth-bearers for 10,000 years. It is also why our work grows more urgent as the transformation quickens. The Imperium must evolve with its master, or it will shatter when the chrysalis finally opens. On the 7th day, we emerged from the warp into the Saturn system. Titan hung before us, its toxic atmosphere cloaking the fortress monastery of the Grey Knights. No defenses challenged our approach. The whisper of truth was known, its signature encoded into systems established millennia ago for this very purpose. We sat down in a secluded hangar, far from the primary fortress structures. No honor guard awaited us, no ceremony, only a single figure in Terminator plate, the weight of his presence marking him as no ordinary warrior. Supreme Grand Master Drago, Dionysian said, bowing his head slightly. We bring the 10th bearer, as foretold. The massive warrior studied me with eyes that had gazed into the heart of chaos and remained unbroken. Then the hour draws near, he said, his voice echoing within his helm. The archives are prepared. Come. We followed him through passages hewn from Titan's bedrock, every surface layered with wards and sigils. Unlike the ostentatious splendor of the imperial palace, the Grey Knight's fortress was stripped of ornament. Pure function. These were men who needed no reminder of their purpose. It was etched into their very souls. The Librarium Obscuros lay deep within, behind doors of adamantium etched with warding sigils. Drago pressed a gauntleted hand to a recognition panel, and the doors swung inward with silent finality. The chamber beyond was not what I expected. I'd anticipated rows of shelves, cogitator stacks, stasis vaults of data. Instead, a single pedestal stood at the center of a circular room. Upon it rested a device I recognized from ancient records, a Horus Heresy-era Scryer cogitator built to interface directly with the mind, bypassing any physical medium. The Codex Obscuros, Drago said, gesturing toward it. Not a book, but an experience. The preserved witnessings of every truth-bearer, stored in full sensory and emotional fidelity. You will add your record to theirs, Atheon, and in doing so, you will receive theirs. I approached cautiously. Direct mind interface technology had largely been abandoned after the heresy, too prone to warp contamination. That the Grey Knights still use such a device spoke volumes about both their confidence in their psychic defenses and the value they placed on preserving our accounts unfiltered. Is it safe? I asked, not for my own sake, but for the integrity of the knowledge it contained. As safe as any contact with truth can be, Drago answered. It will change you, as it has changed all who preceded you. But better to be changed by truth than comforted by lies. I glanced at Dionysian. He nodded. The other truth-bearers remained by the door, witnesses to this ritual of succession. Drawing a steadying breath, I placed my hands on the smooth surface of the Scryer cogitator. It awoke at once, burrowing into my mind in ways I could neither sense nor resist. The chamber vanished, replaced by a storm of memory and sensation. I was no longer only myself. I was 9 others as well. I walked ancient corridors beside Constantin Valdor, the first truth-bearer, only centuries after the Emperor's enthronement. I felt his shock at finding not a fully divine being, but a man in the midst of becoming, still clinging to humanity even as warp energies seeped into his essence. Through Valdor's eyes, the Emperor was still recognizably human. The corruption, if one could call it that, was little more than a golden radiance and a slight unreality at the edges of his form, I stood with Dionysian 3,000 years later and saw a far more divided emperor. The human aspect still primary, but sharing space with something other. Not chaotic, not random, but carefully altered, adapting to existence between realms. Through each bearer, I watched the progression, the material form slowly ceding ground to the immaterial, the divide growing more pronounced, yet simultaneously the warp aspect became more ordered, more intentional. Less mutation, more design. And through each mind, I felt not only what they saw, but what they concluded. Their hopes, their fears, their attempts to interpret the pattern. Some believed the transformation heralded humanity's salvation, the emperor becoming what his species required to survive. Others feared it was ultimate corruption, chaos winning not through conquest, but through slow, insidious change. Most chose to suspend judgment, observe, record, leave conclusions for those who would live to see the final stage. Time lost meaning in that interface. It might have been hours. It might have been days. When I finally came back to myself, I was on my knees before the pedestal, chest heaving. The other truth-bearers and Drago watched me with a mixture of concern and knowing. "Now you see," Dionysian said, helping me stand. "Not just your own witnessing, but the whole pattern." I nodded, words slow to form. The experience had been overwhelming, not just sensory, but conceptual. To see the Emperor's transformation unfold across 10,000 years was to understand its trajectory in a way no single encounter ever could. "It is not corruption," I said at last. "Not as we use the word. It is controlled, deliberate. He is not being changed. He is directing the change, bending it toward a purpose we can only guess at." Drago inclined his head. "That has been the conclusion of the Grey Knights for millennia. Whatever the Emperor is becoming, it is by his intent, not by the victory of chaos. But that does not make it less perilous, nor its outcome less uncertain." "The final phase," I said, seeing the pattern clearly now. "If it continues as it has, the division between material and immaterial aspects will collapse within a century. The halves will fuse into a single being, neither wholly physical nor wholly of the warp." "A god in truth," Dionysian agreed. "But what kind of god? That is the question that remains unanswered." Drago turned to a concealed alcove and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth of gold. "For 10,000 years we have guarded this," he said. "The Emperor's final instruction, ordered to be opened by the 10th bearer upon completion of their witnessing." He offered it to me. It was surprisingly light for something so clearly significant. My hands trembled, despite custodian discipline, as I unwrapped the cloth. A data crystal lay within, ancient, its surface etched with sigils older than the Imperium. I recognized them from records of the Unification Wars, the Emperor's personal cipher, used before he took the Aquila as his symbol. "It has never been accessed," Drago said. "No one possesses the authority." "Nor do I protested. "I am only the 10th bearer, not the Emperor himself. The crystal is keyed to respond only to the 10th bearer," Dionysian said quietly. "It was made for you, Atheon, though he crafted it 10,000 years ago. It held the Emperor's contingency plans, his guidance for the great change." I turned the crystal over in my hand, feeling its weight in more ways than one. This was not just a relic, it was the final intent of a being poised between humanity and godhood, the last fully human thoughts of the master of mankind, before his transformation advanced beyond recall. "How do I access it?" I asked. Drago indicated a recessed reader set into the wall beside the scryer cogitator. "It is ready," with a reverence that felt almost like worship, despite everything I now knew about his true nature. I placed the crystal into the reader. The device stirred to life, not projecting words or images, but something far more intimate, a direct mental impression. The Emperor's mind brushed mine across 10,000 years. Not the split being I had seen in the vault beneath the palace, not the god thing of imperial dogma. This was the man, the human who had unified Terra and led humanity to the stars. His mental voice was strong, clear, undiminished by time or change. "Bearer of the 10th witnessing," it said. "You see me now, in my transitional state, divided between what I was and what I am becoming. Know that this division is necessary. The path to transcendence requires comprehension of both material and immaterial reality. I cannot guide humanity by remaining purely physical, nor can I protect it by becoming purely a creature of the warp." The voice paused, collecting itself, though even this echo of his mind staggered me with its sheer depth and power. "What you have seen is not corruption, but evolution," he continued. "A required adaptation of humanity's guardian to threats that exist beyond the simple confines of the material universe. The ruinous powers corrupt because they are reflections of humanity's darkest impulses given form and will within the warp. I seek another way, the elevation of humanity's noblest aspects into a form able to oppose chaos on its own ground." Images accompanied the words, millennia of planning unfolding at once. The deliberate sacrifice of his physical form, not as defeat, but as calculated strategy. The golden throne revealed not as a glorified life support device, but as a chrysalis. Humanity's faith, quadrillions of prayers and desperate hopes, shown not as wasted energy, but as carefully harnessed power, directed toward a deliberate transformation rather than aimless godhood. "When the great change is complete," the Emperor said, "I will emerge neither human nor god, as these concepts are commonly understood. I will be a being of both realms, able to act in each at once. Humanity's first truly evolved form, a template for what your species must become if it is to endure threats both physical and metaphysical." More visions followed, a future in which humanity walks the same path, not warped by chaos, but rising past the weaknesses that birthed chaos in the first place. Beings of matter and energy, body and soul, held in balance rather than torn by constant conflict. "But this future is not guaranteed," the voice warned. "My transformation may fail. The balance may tip toward corruption rather than transcendence. The power accumulated through human faith may scatter uselessly into the warp, or worse, be seized by the ruinous powers and turned upon those it was meant to shield." The tone sharpened, urgency cutting through the immense calm. "This is why you exist, 10th Bearer, you and those you will prepare. The great change nears its conclusion. When it comes, humanity must be ready. Those who rule must understand what is happening. They must not react with terror and rejection, but with acceptance and adaptation. The Imperium must evolve alongside its master, or both will perish in the storm that approaches." Then came the practical instructions. Names, worlds, positions of influence, people scattered across the Imperium who had already been subtly cultivated by previous bearers. Others identified by temperament or circumstance as likely to accept the truth rather than shatter beneath it. A timeline for revelation synchronized with the final stages of the Emperor's own metamorphosis. 108 years, the voice concluded. "That is the time remaining before the chrysalis opens. Use it well, Bearer. What emerges when the golden throne fails will decide humanity's fate for all eternity." The projection faded. The crystal went dark. I remained where I stood, frozen, my thoughts struggling to wrap themselves around what I had received. Not just knowledge, but purpose. Clearer and more focused than anything I had known in 10,000 years of service. The Emperor was not dead. Not a mere corpse kept functioning by machines and faith. Not a passive victim of Horus's blow. He was changing, evolving, becoming something the galaxy had never seen. And he had planned for this moment, this edge of transformation, since the day he was interred upon the throne. "Now you see," Dionysian said quietly, reading my expression. Now you understand why we exist, and why faith alone cannot carry humanity through what comes." I could only nod. Words felt inadequate beside the sheer scale of what I had glimpsed. The Emperor's design extending across 10 millennia, each step of his transformation calculated, every phase aligned toward a conclusion neither faith nor science alone could truly grasp. "The question remains," Drago said, his tone solemn even filtered through his helm's vox, "whether this is truly humanity's salvation, or whether, in his isolation, the Emperor has found a way to rationalize surrender to the very forces he once fought. Not even the Grey Knights can say with certainty. Perhaps certainty is not necessary," I answered, finding my voice at last. "Perhaps what matters is not the destination, but the act of moving toward it. The Emperor changes. So must humanity. So must the Imperium." "And that," Dionysian said, with something close to satisfaction, "is why you were chosen. You understand that truth is rarely comfortable, yet always necessary." Drago gestured toward the exit. "You have much to decide with your fellow bearers, and a strategy to craft. I will return in 3 days to hear your plan." He left us alone in the chamber. The 5 of us gathered around the dormant Scrya cogitator, each lost in private reflection. 108 years, the woman said at last, breaking the silence. "Barely a heartbeat on an imperial scale. But enough," the Ancient One replied, "if we act with purpose." Dionysian turned to me. "You have received the Emperor's final instructions. You hold the names, the timetable. As 10th bearer, the cycle's completion, leadership of our order belongs to you. What course do you set?" The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, heavier than any aura might plate. The fate of the Imperium, perhaps of humanity, hinged on what I chose to do in the coming decades. "We divide the labor," I said, as the outline of a plan crystallized. "Each bearer assumes responsibility for specific sectors and key individuals. We coordinate our revelations. Those who most urgently require understanding are reached first, then the circle widens." I looked to Dionysian. "You have served the longest. Your familiarity with the work of past bearers is unmatched. You will remain here on Titan, maintain our link to the Grey Knights, and oversee our efforts across the Imperium." He bowed his head in acceptance, no hesitation. "The rest of us disperse," I continued. "1 to the Inquisition, 1 to the Adeptus Mechanicus, 1 to the Imperial Guard High Command. I will take responsibility for the Space Marine chapters and the Adeptus Administratum. I let the most radical part of the plan fall last. And we do not restrict our successors to custodians. With the 10th witnessing, the pattern changes. From now on, any who can bear the truth may be shaped to carry it." The others nodded slowly. It was a departure from 10,000 years of tradition, but tradition had brought us to the brink of the great change. It would not carry us beyond. "And the message?" the woman asked. "What exactly do we tell them, and how much?" I considered that carefully. The full truth of the Emperor's transformation would annihilate the sanity of most, even those deemed ready. What we needed was a ladder of understanding, not a plunge into the void. "We start with his intent, not his appearance," I said. "We teach that his death was a strategic withdrawal, a required stage in humanity's defense. We recast the Golden Throne as chrysalis instead of life support. We speak of emergence, not decay, of transcendence, not damnation." "And for those strong enough to bear more?" the Ancient One asked. "Then we introduce the dual nature," I answered. "We explain the balance between the material and the immaterial, and that what the Imperium worships is neither the mortal man who once walked among us, nor the crude god of popular belief, but something in transition between those states. Not a static being, but a becoming." Dionysian gave a small nod. "And the end point itself?" he said. "The great change. What do we tell them awaits when the Golden Throne finally fails?" I recalled the images the Emperor had impressed upon my mind. Humanity transformed, neither enslaved by matter nor devoured by the warp, but redefined. We tell them humanity stands on the edge of its next evolution, I said. That what the Emperor becomes, humanity may one day follow, not through mutation or corruption, but through transcendence, the breaking down of the walls between body and soul, matter and energy, forging beings who can face the horrors of the galaxy on equal footing. They will call it heresy, the woman warned. Even those most open to new ideas will struggle. Then we must help them see beyond the narrow lines of orthodoxy and heresy, I said. The Emperor himself has transcended those categories. Those who would shepherd humanity through the great change must do the same. We debated throughout the ship's artificial night, refining our strategy, assigning targets, designing methods of contact and coordination. By the time Drago returned 3 days later, our plan was complete. He stood in silence while I outlined it. Our division of duties, our timeline, our approach to resistance. When I finished, he removed his helm for the first time, revealing a face furrowed by experience, yet still fierce in its resolve. You know that many will reject this, he said. Some will see it as the purest heresy. They will oppose you with everything they command. We anticipate resistance, I replied. From the ecclesiarchy above all, but also from conservative factions within the Inquisition and certain chapters. We have identified the most likely centers of opposition and planned accordingly. In what way? Drago asked, his gaze narrowing slightly. The Grey Knights cannot endorse violence against loyal servants of the Imperium, however misguided. Not violence, I said. Reassignment, containment. We will steer those who cannot accept the truth into positions where they can no longer obstruct what must be done. Their faith in the Emperor as a simple god has sustained humanity for millennia. We do not scorn it. But we cannot allow it to prevent humanity from adapting to what comes. Drago weighed this, then nodded. The Grey Knights will remain neutral in this, he said. We battle the external foes of mankind, not its inner conflicts. But we will continue to offer sanctuary to the truth-bearers and guard the knowledge you have amassed. That is all we require, I said. That and your silence while we begin. You have both, he replied. Your ship is ready. Your journey of distance and of purpose is long. We departed Titan the next day. The whisper of truth slipped once more into the warp, bound for the first of many waypoints. At the Mandeville point of the Sol system, our paths would diverge, each bearer heading toward their assigned region of the Imperium. It was likely I would not see them again for decades, if ever. Our work would be separate, but in harmony, guided by the Emperor's last human instructions and our shared grasp of the great change. As Saturn shrank to a distant glint behind us, I stood at the observation port and considered the journey I'd undergone. From custodian to truth-bearer, from guardian of a sacred relic I only half understood to herald of a transformation I could barely fathom. I had lost much. My brotherhood, my certainties, my place in the rigid order of the palace. But I had gained something greater. Purpose, understanding, and the privilege of shaping humanity's response to the most profound event since the Emperor first ascended the Golden Throne. My hand went to the twisted aquila pinned inside my robe. Once it had felt like a burden. Now it was a reminder of the truth I bore and the duty I had accepted. The Golden Throne bleeds, the God Thing stirs, the Imperium changes. And I, Atheon, once shield captain of the Adeptus Custodes, now truth-bearer, will help lead humanity through the storm that approaches. Not with comfortable lies. Not with blind faith, but with truth, terrible and glorious, shattering and exalting, the truth of the Emperor's real form, the truth of humanity's ultimate destiny. 108 years until the great change. The work begins now.